been over 25 years since Selena Quintanilla was taken from this world. And yet, the woman responsible for that loss hasn't stopped talking about her. From behind prison walls, Yolanda Saldívar, the woman convicted of murdering the queen of Tejano music, continues to write letters, statements, claims. Some say it's obsession. Others believe it's guilt. But those who've read her words or even just heard what she's still saying agree on one thing. They're disturbing. Because while Selena's legacy continues to inspire joy, love, and music, Yolanda's words bring none of that. Instead, they echo something else, something far more unsettling. A refusal to let go, a rewriting of truth, and a silence that never comes. So what exactly is Yolanda still saying from prison? And why are so many fans begging, pleading, for her to stop? Let's take a closer look at the letters, the language, and the obsession that still won't die. For millions, Selena isn't just a singer. She's a memory, a voice that brings comfort, a story that still hurts. Even now, decades after her passing, her music is played across generations. Her face appears on murals, magazine covers, makeup lines, and documentaries. She has become more than an artist. She is a symbol of cultural pride, innocence lost, and dreams unfulfilled. Selena's life was filled with light, and her death, sudden and senseless, created a shadow that never quite disappeared. That's why so many of her fans, especially women who saw themselves in her, feel so deeply connected to her memory. She wasn't hardened by fame. She wasn't distant. Selena was vibrant, kind, funny, and real. And her tragic end wasn't just a headline. It was a heartbreak. So when someone disrupts that memory, especially someone like Yolanda, it doesn't go unnoticed. Because while Selena's legacy was built on music, love, and family, Yolanda's continued presence in the media feels like a dark echo that refuses to fade. And it's that refusal, her continued efforts to stay in the conversation, that has so many fans asking, why is she still talking? Yolanda Saldívar was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Selena Quintanilla on March 31, 1995. The case was as public as it was painful. Yolanda had been more than a fan. She was entrusted with running Selena's fan club and later, overseeing parts of her business. She wasn't just close to Selena, she was invited into the fold. But something changed. Accusations of embezzlement, tension, confrontation, and then violence. In a motel room in Corpus Christi, Texas, Yolanda pulled a gun and ended the life of the very woman she claimed to admire. The court didn't buy her story. Neither did the public. And she was sent away, sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. For many, that should have been the end of Yolanda's story. But it wasn't. From the early years of her imprisonment to more recent times, Yolanda has continued to speak about Selena. Not always through interviews, but in statements, parole documents, and reported letters from prison. And the disturbing part? She often paints herself as the victim. In a 2020 interview years after her conviction, Yolanda claimed, "They made me out to be a monster." She said she was misunderstood, that she didn't mean to hurt Selena. But fans weren't buying it, because these weren't words of remorse. They were words of deflection. And over time, it became clear, Yolanda wasn't just apologizing. She was rewriting. She suggested that the shooting was an accident, that she had been pushed, that it was all a misunderstanding. And in some cases, especially in the documents tied to her parole eligibility, she's hinted that Selena bore some of the blame. That's what makes these letters, these statements, these little breadcrumbs from prison, so difficult to read, because they don't reflect closure. They reflect fixation. Multiple sources over the years have spoken of Yolanda continuing to write about Selena from her cell. Some say she journals obsessively. Others claim she writes letters addressed to journalists or legal teams, often referencing Selena in chilling detail. In one documented instance, Yolanda claimed to hold secrets that have never been told. Another time, she described Selena's final moments in a way that felt invasive, like she was still trying to control the narrative even now. These aren't just letters. their attempts to stay attached. And that's what haunts so many fans. Because while the rest of the world has tried to move forward, to honor Selena's memory through celebration and music, Yolanda keeps dragging it backward. Not with tears, but with ink. There's something chilling about a person who speaks in circles, who never admits, never apologizes, and never lets go. That's how many describe Yolanda Saldívar's writings and statements from prison. While few of her personal letters have been made public word for word, those who've encountered them, through parole documents, legal filings, and interviews, paint a disturbing picture, not of remorse, but of rationalization. In a 2020 parole-related filing, Yolanda reportedly included statements attempting to justify her actions. She didn't call it murder. She called it a tragedy, an accident, a moment of emotional confusion. She said she loved Selena, that she would never have intentionally hurt her. But then, she blamed Selena's father. She suggested that pressure from Abraham Quintanilla had pushed things too far, that Selena was torn between loyalty to her family and loyalty to Yolanda. In another documented interview from years earlier, she said, "Selena didn't want to leave me behind. That's what hurt her the most." That quote sent chills through fans, because it didn't sound like accountability. It sounded like ownership, as if Selena belonged to her, as if, even in death, Yolanda still saw herself as part of Selena's life. And when you add up the fragments, the letters, the interviews, the court filings, one thing becomes clear. Yolanda isn't just trying to clear her name. She's trying to stay close to Selena, through memory, through words, through revision. Several journalists who followed the case have noted this unsettling trend. One described her tone as emotionally flat. Another said her letters read more like journal entries than reflections of remorse. But perhaps the most telling line came from a former legal analyst who reviewed a parole document submitted on Yolanda's behalf. It's almost like she thinks she still has a relationship with Selena. That's what disturbs fans the most. Because Selena isn't here to speak for herself. She can't write letters. She can't respond. And yet, the woman who ended her life continues to write as if she's still part of it. To this day, Yolanda reportedly refers to Selena in the present tense. She has never fully admitted guilt, not in a way that satisfies fans or the Quintanilla family. And every time she speaks from her cell, it feels like she's opening old wounds on purpose. These aren't just words on paper. They're reminders that the story isn't over, at least not for her. It's no surprise that Selena's family wants nothing to do with Yolanda's words. Abraham Quintanilla, Selena's father, has spoken openly over the years about the pain that Yolanda continues to cause. In a rare 2021 interview, when asked about Yolanda's upcoming parole eligibility, he didn't hold back. He said, "She's never shown real remorse. All she does is talk. She keeps making it about her." For the Quintanilla family, Yolanda's letters and interviews aren't just frustrating. They're insulting, because they don't reflect sorrow. They reflect ego. Selena's mother, Marcela, has largely stayed quiet. But insiders say that every time Yolanda's name resurfaces in the media, it brings the family back to that terrible day in 1995. Chris Perez, Selena's husband, has also maintained distance. He rarely speaks about Yolanda publicly, but fans have noted his subtle responses, especially when her name trends. In one post, years ago, Chris simply wrote, "Some people never learn." It was never confirmed who he meant, but the timing was unmistakable. And while the family stays guarded, the fans are not. Online forums, comment sections, and social media platforms are filled with emotional pleas. She's doing this for attention. Why does she keep talking about Selena? It's been nearly 30 years. Let her rest. Stop giving Yolanda a platform. There's a pattern here. Selena's fans, many of them women who grew up with her music, feel fiercely protective of her legacy. They see these letters, these public statements, as a violation, not just of justice, but of memory. Because for them, Selena was more than a pop star. She was the one who never got to finish her story. And every time Yolanda picks up a pen, it feels like she's stealing more of it. There's even a growing sentiment among the fan base that media outlets should stop covering Yolanda altogether. Stop publishing her letters. One fan wrote, "She had her trial. She had her say. Now she should be silent." Another woman, who identified herself as a longtime fan from Texas, wrote, "Selena was grace. Yolanda is noise. And the more we amplify Yolanda, the more we drown out the beauty that Selena left behind." It's hard to ignore the pain in those words, because it's not just about what happened in 1995. It's about what keeps happening every time Yolanda sends out another message from behind bars. And to the fans, the family, and the people who still light candles for Selena every year, that pain still feels fresh. For months, fans held their breath as 2025 approached. That year marked 30 years since Selena's death, and Yolanda Saldívar's first chance at parole. The idea that she could walk free after everything sparked outrage across social media and fan communities. And the timing couldn't have been more painful. March 30th, 2025. One day before the anniversary of the day she pulled the trigger. But now the decision is in. Her parole has been denied. And while that brought relief to many, it wasn't a victory, because the damage her words have caused didn't end with the hearing. In her official filings, Yolanda once again failed to show remorse. She didn't call it murder. She didn't fully admit guilt. She used phrases like tragic incident and emotional confusion. And instead of accepting responsibility, she pointed fingers. At Selena's father, at the pressures of fame, even at Selena herself. To those reviewing the case, that wasn't rehabilitation. That was evasion. One official close to the parole review was quoted anonymously saying, "There was no accountability, no real remorse. It was clear she still views herself as misunderstood, not guilty." And that's why the letters matter. Because they weren't just private thoughts. They were proof. Proof that Yolanda Saldívar isn't just frozen in the past. She's still trying to rewrite it. And that obsession, that refusal to let Selena go, it's the very reason her parole was denied. Yet even now, she hasn't stopped. According to insiders at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, Yolanda continues to write from prison. Letters, notes, statements. In some, she still refers to Selena in the present tense. In others, she drops cryptic hints about untold truths or what really happened. To fans, these aren't just words. They're threats. Threats to Selena's memory. Threats to the peace so many have spent decades trying to protect. Because while the justice system may have kept Yolanda behind bars, her voice is still leaking through, and the wounds she caused are still wide open. There's a reason this story still hurts. Selena wasn't just a rising star. She wasn't just beautiful or talented. She was beloved. And her death wasn't just tragic. It was senseless. For years, her fans have done everything they can to keep her memory alive. Through tribute concerts, documentaries, foundation work, and heartfelt stories passed from one generation to the next. They don't talk about the tragedy. They talk about the light, the smile, the voice, the kindness. That's the Selena they remember. But every time Yolanda speaks, whether through a letter, a filing, or a so-called reflection, it feels like a cloud passing over that light, because she doesn't speak with regret. She doesn't speak with grace. She speaks with control, still trying to define a moment she created, still trying to justify the unjustifiable, still trying to stay connected to a life she destroyed. And maybe that's the most disturbing part of all, because Selena deserved peace, not just in life but in memory. And yet, decades later, she's still being pulled into the darkness of Yolanda's words. Fans don't want revenge. They want silence. Not because they hate, but because they loved her. Because they still do. So when they say, "Let Selena rest in peace," it's not just a phrase. It's a plea for the letters to stop. For the media to stop giving Yolanda attention. For the story to belong to Selena again. Not to the woman who ended it. Because if Selena taught the world anything, it's that grace lasts longer than hate. And if Yolanda Saldívar can't find the silence to honor that, then maybe the rest of us can. For more of the latest news, check out this video.